Saints, God-fearing men and women who dedicated their lives to serving God. Wise, pious, free from sin, depicted with halos. This is how we often imagine saints. In this video, we will take a look at the Nordic countries' patron saints, their lives, deaths, and legacies. How did these men become saints? Does their story fit the mold of what a pious Christian should be like? Were they, when alive, saintly? We start by looking at Sweden's and Finland's patron saints, Saint Erik and Saint Henrik, because their story is connected. There are no contemporary sources about Erik, so most of what we know about him is written after his death. Henrikslegenden, the legend of Erik, the one that describes his life and death, was written in the second half of the 13th century, that is, about 100 years after the real events. Since Erik was already worshipped as a saint at that time, the story follows the same pattern as other saint legends from the same time. It should therefore be taken with a rather large pinch of salt. But what seems clear is that he was born around 1120, son of the landowner Jedvar Bonde and his wife Cecilia, daughter of the former pagan king Blodsven. At this time, there was not a composite Swedish kingdom, but rather several smaller kingdoms where various kings fought for power. The main ones were Svealand and Götaland. Erik was elected king over Svealand in 1150 and over Götaland in 1156. According to legend, King Erik had 3 goals in life: to build churches, create law and order, and to fight against the enemies of the kingdom and of the Christian faith. He is said to have been a just king, who did not impose any taxes on the people, but was content with which that were his own. His piety was shown through prayers, giving alms to the poor, fasting and sexual abstinence, although not entirely, because he and his wife Christina had 4 children together. When Erik had completed the first 2 goals on his to-do list, finished building old Uppsala cathedral and introducing new laws, he turned to the last point, to fight against the enemies of the faith. At this point in the story, Finland's national saint, Saint Henrik, appears. He is said to have been a bishop in Uppsala, and the king took him on a crusade to Christianize the people of Finland. He offered them Christian faith and peace, but the Finns resisted. Then Erik attacked them and killed many and forced the rest to repent. According to Henrikslegenden, after the battles, he cried and prayed to God to spare the souls of the fallen pagans. Then he founded churches and installed Henrik as bishop over the new Christian areas in Finland. He then returned victorious to Sweden. On Ascension Day in May 1160, Erik was celebrating Mass in the Church of the Holy Trinity in Uppsala when he was warned that an enemy army was approaching. It was a rival for the throne, the Danish prince Magnus Henriksson, who came to challenge him. But Erik asked his men to wait and hear the Mass. Then he went outside with his men, even though they were outnumbered, and in the fighting that followed, Erik was badly wounded and finally beheaded. According to the legend of Erik, a spring sprang up at the spot where he fell, something that in the Middle Ages was often seen as proof of someone's sanctity. Moreover, miracles began to happen. The very first occurred shortly after Erik's death, when his body was taken to an old blind woman who lived nearby. When she touched his body and then rubbed her bloody fingers over her eyes, she immediately regained her sight. The stories of Saint Erik's miracles also follow the same template as the other saint legends. Sick people get well when they pray to Erik. Crazy people are cured. The harvest is successful. Boats are saved from storms. All when people pray to Erik and make various promises to the saint. such as donating money to monasteries or making pilgrimages. How did Bishop Henrik, who was left behind in Finland, fare? Not so well. In the legend of Saint Henrik, we can read that he boldly stayed behind when King Erik returned to Sweden to water the young plants of the newly converted and to strengthen the worship of God. He renounced his high position as Bishop of Uppsala to be like a shepherd for the people of Finland. As part of this work, he rebuked a murderer and imposed church discipline on him. This could mean being forbidden from taking communion, being forced to confess and repent one's sins to the whole congregation, or, in worst case, being excluded from the Christian community. This, however, was not well received by the killer, Lalli, who also killed Henrik. After the deed, the murderer took the bishop's mitre and placed it on his own head to boast of his misdeeds. But that was a mistake. When he tried to remove the mitre, the skin and flesh followed and was torn from his head. This was the first of Saint Henrik's miracles. Others followed this familiar pattern. The sick who are healed when they pray to the holy bishop. The dead are raised. The lame can walk again, and the blind regain their sight. Now the question remains, what is true in these stories? Most historians agree that King Erik really existed, but Saint Henrik's existence is more disputed. Something that suggests that he was not a real person is that he is not mentioned in any contemporary sources at all. If he had really been a bishop in Uppsala, he should appear in its records, but he does not. According to some accounts, he became a bishop in Turku before his death, but there's no evidence for that either. It may be that Henrik is simply a fictional personification of the crusade against Finland and the country's Christianization. However, the crusades themselves are also questioned. There is evidence that Finland was already largely Christian at the time when Erik and Henrik are said to have been there. Many historians believe that the war campaigns were more about raiding and conquering lands and were disguised as religiously motivated crusades to gain legitimacy. Erik was buried in the cathedral in Old Uppsala that he had completed, and his remains were later moved to the current cathedral in Uppsala. Examinations have been made of his skeleton, and the injuries that can be seen confirm that he died a violent death, most likely by decapitation. This agrees with the legend of the saint. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that he died a martyr's death in a righteous battle for the throne. In a letter from Pope Alexander III, probably written in the 1170s, to a Swedish king whose names begin with a K, the Pope states that he heard that a cult of saints had arisen around a drunkard who died during a brawl. He forbids further worship of the unnamed person. Some historians have interpreted this King K as Erik's son Knut, who later became king. If so, the worship that the Pope forbids may be of Erik. In that case, it is not a very good sign for Erik's sanctity. But if it was a letter to Knut, he ignored it completely. He did everything he could to create a cult around his father, which of course contributed in strengthening his own position of power and status. Neither Erik nor Henrik has been officially canonized by the Catholic Church. In the 12th century, the Pope did not yet have exclusive right to perform canonizations, but this could be done by the local bishop. It is worth noting, however, that although there may be political motives for the worship, we should not ignore the fact that faith was incredibly important in the Middle Ages, and that God, saints, and miracles were something that people really believed in. It is therefore not likely that those who wrote the legends of saints deliberately lied, but really believed what they wrote. To them, it was real.